Punk rock has a particularly unique way of bringing damaged and broken people together to one place and to one community, and it's actually very beautiful when they find one another and love blossoms. But what's not beautiful is when they take a toxic relationship and overly romanticize it to the point of being like cinematic or whatever. This cliche, this trope is so overused that anytime a television show or a movie portrays a rock and roll relationship, it's this damaged aesthetic that they go for, and it's totally whack. Not every rock and roll relationship is a cesspool for abuse, and the ones that are shouldn't be romanticized and exploited generation after generation. And luckily, it's starting to become a little bit less prevalent, but there is a modern example that I'm going to talk about in this video. Hey ladies, how's it going? Dan Frampton here, and today we're going to talk about some damaged relationships through history, but not damaged relationships in the way where there were just like hurt and broken people abusing one another. No, we're talking about the ones that were exploited and that everybody, for some reason in the public, became enamored with. The first stop we're going to make is clearly Sid and Nancy, because this is the relationship that all these other relationships are built upon. Sid was the bass player in the Sex Pistols, but kind of like an unwitting one. You know, he didn't really know how to play bass, and he wasn't in the band to begin with. And when he was finally invited into the band, it was all about looks and aesthetic for him. Or it was all about spiking hair and putting spikes on jackets kind of thing, you know? And then a groupie got her claws into him, and he couldn't let go. He fell in love with that groupie, and that groupie was Nancy. She was an American that was over there in Britain causing her brand of chaos. And Sid was just kind of like a misguided, nice little boy before this, but when Nancy entered the picture, that's when shit got way out of hand. This is one of the most insane cases of this, and it is one of the first ones. It's like ground zero. But I do think that there is a more quintessential damaged couple that needs to stop being romanticized. He says while romanticizing all these relationships. I get it. I get the irony. Just let me continue. And you don't need to look far to get our next example, because Machine Gun Kelly put out a song on his latest record called Sid and Nancy. And guess what? It's about romanticizing Sid and Nancy. And who's he in a relationship with? Well, that happens to be this Megan Fox character. And Megan Fox isn't typically the kind of woman that you'd think would be in this damaged type relationship, because she's kind of like a superstar in Hollywood. But I'm telling you, that cinematic, damaged aesthetic is just so appealing. It makes you think that you come across like a badass, you know? You're like, oh yeah, I'm in this really edgy, rugged relationship. When in reality, relationships shouldn't be edgy. But what do I know about love? You guys apparently have found it. And on this list, I will say that these guys are the least egregious example of this being played out in real life. But it might be the most egregious because they're the ones that are really leaning on it from a marketing and branding type perspective. They're just there in their mansion, you know, living their Hollywood life. There's nothing edgy about these guys whatsoever. But in the mainstream, they want you to think that they are the edgy couple. And that's in a world that Travis Barker exists in. And he's the most edgy guy of all of them. And if you're looking at this picture that I have pulled up and you're like, what the hell is going on? Yeah, it's kind of silly. This is their Halloween costume that kind of, I wouldn't say broke the internet, because I didn't hear about this until I was actually searching for it. But it was a bit controversial. People were like, that's blasphemous. You're like, this is Halloween, people. Why are you going so crazy? And if I'm going to provide you any commentary, this is actually healthy couple behavior. Getting together on Halloween, celebrating a holiday together, doing a couple's costume. That's healthy stuff. Below the surface, there's nothing damaged going on here. So why were you out here writing this song, Sid and Nancy, when you're actually in more of like a King of Queens type scenario? But we don't need to look any further than Megan Fox's Instagram that we're already on to get our next example of a damaged couple, and this one was a 90s example, one that I am acutely familiar with, and that is Tommy Lee and Pamela Anderson. And if you're looking at this picture, you probably think that this was Tommy Lee and Pamela Anderson. But this is Machine Gun Kelly and Megan Fox dressed up as, I'm not saying their names again, this is them dressed up as them. It's nuts. It's such a good costume. You gotta give respect and credit where respect and credit are due. Just look at this. This is them all dressed up, and this is the original picture. Isn't that nuts? Isn't that crazy? Good job, them. Again, healthy couple behavior. But you know what wasn't a healthy couple? The people that they're mimicking, Tommy and Pamela. This was not a healthy arrangement. So Pamela Anderson, where do we start with her? Okay, let's start with the Tool Man, Tim Allen, Tim Taylor. On Home Improvement, she was like the Home Improvement girl at first, and then she was replaced. But she went on to bigger and better things called Baywatch. And in the 90s, she was just like the quintessential blonde bimbo babe. You know, that was who she was, that was her brand, that was what she rocked. Enter Tommy Lee, the drummer of hair metal band Motley Crue. They're getting together. He's swinging his huge Johnson all around. She's like, whoo, baby, that's a big rock and roll Johnson you got over there. How about you bring that big rock and roll Johnson over here and let's film it on a boat? And that's exactly what they did, and that was pretty much the first celebrity sex tape that kicked off that whole nonsense. So without Tommy Lee and Pamela Anderson, there's no Kim Kardashian. And the reason why Kim Kardashian is not on this list is because her relationship with Kanye, once it became toxic and damaged, she didn't lean on it for aesthetic and marketing and branding. She got rid of his ass. But she also went to a big rock and roll Johnson, but then threw that guy out to the curb too. But this video that I have pulled up here is Tommy Lee's band in the 90s, Methods of Mayhem. The one that he wasn't the drummer of, he was the actual singer of this thing, and I'm glad this thing didn't get a whole lot of attention because it kind of sucks ass. But back in the day when this came out, man, yeah, I liked it. Yeah, it's true. But this song, Get Naked, is all about that whole sex tape scenario. If you haven't heard it, it's the cringiest thing in the world, and I do recommend that you go check it out just to have a good little laugh. But if we're gonna keep it in the 90s, I just did a whole video about Tim and Brody Armstrong, which I'll leave in a card right here. So I'm not gonna go into super detail about it here, but if you wanna know more about it, watch that video after this one. But basically, Tim Armstrong, frontman, guitarist, singer-songwriter in Rancid, one of the more prolific and influential punk rock songwriters of the time, fell in love with a 16-year-old Brody doll in Australia and waited until she was 18 and then had a little bit of a marriage type situation. If you want to know a little bit more about that, I got a video. But if you want even more detailed look at this whole weird creepiness, there's this guy named Dan Ozzie that put out a book called Sellout, and apparently the Distillers chapter in that book is a little bit graphic on the situation. But Tim wrote a couple songs when he was courting her that came out on Life Won't Wait, particularly this one, Corazon de Oro, which means Heart of Gold. And who would have thought? They're both pretty catchy, kind of reggae type flavored songs, but lyrics like a red flag and nobody wins. He knew that this was totally fucked up. And then after it all went to shit, he put out a song called Fall Back Down, where he's like, oh man, it all went to shit, but I'm gonna get picked back up again because I have some great friends around me, but it was a bad time and you're a bad person. Let's just go in to see what he has to say about it. Well, the worst of times, they don't faze me, even if I act really crazy. On my way down, she betrayed me. Now my vision is no longer hazy. I'm very lucky to have my crew. They stood by me when she flew. I've been knocked down, beat down, black and blue. She's not the one coming back for you. But yeah, that was a damaged relationship that shouldn't have been as romanticized and as publicized as it was. There was also this song called Tropical London about her, but I'm not gonna read any lyrics from that. Now, unfortunately, we reached a part of the video that doesn't naturally segue into the next couple here that I want to talk about. But the next couples I want to talk about aren't necessarily the ones that fall into the rock and roll or punk rock spheres. But this one, when it happened, was as damaged and as romanticized as one could be, and that was Britney and Kevin. It was so romanticized that they had a show, a reality show that is, about them where they had cameras following them around called Chaotic. You can't get any more exploitative of damaged, broken people than this. And this was the relationship that kicked off the whole she's not safe to be around herself type narrative that her dad and everyone was spinning, that got her in that conservatorship that she just got out of or whatever. And apparently, as of a couple weeks ago, that whole drama kicked off again. Kevin Federline is back in the news, being like, yo, she is arguing with our sons and stuff and is an abusive person, and she should be locked back up again. I don't want to show any of that stuff because I haven't researched any of it, but yeah, that is just back in the news again. They're being toxic and damaged and using it for clicks. Very sad, very stupid. Okay, this next one is a bit before my time, and it defies all expectations in this video, because when you think of a damaged couple, you're thinking of the Sid and Nancy's of the world. You're not necessarily thinking of the John and Yokos. But in my opinion, John and Yoko are an example of a toxic, damaged couple used to exploit how toxic and damaged they were, and not a healthy couple that existed for pure love and harmony. And it's that contradiction alone that lands them here on this list. They're the couple that's supposed to be all about love and harmony. But the amount of relationships that were broken all around them, the amount of bridges that were burned, how insular and one-dimensional they became was not only damaging and toxic to everybody around them, but to themselves as well. It was creative suicide, it was career suicide, it was all sorts of bad stuff for both of them. And Yoko Ono will forever be known as the person that broke up the Beatles. And that distinction carries off into every other band, that when a member gets a girlfriend, is she the Yoko Ono? Will be the question asked. So if there's a band member inviting their girlfriend to practices, and then that girlfriend is like, hey, you're actually the star here, that's a bit of a Yoko move. And that's kind of crazy because Nancy was also the Yoko. So do you see how these wires cross and that these relationships belong on the same list? They're both going like, hey, you know, you're actually the star of this band that you're not currently the star of. You should act like the star. And then they just go ahead and go, you're right, I'm gonna act like the star and ruin everything around me. But we haven't reached the end of the list yet. There is still one more couple that I'm going to talk about that used the fact that they were so damaged as a way to get people talking. And I'm sure that you know the couple that I'm going to talk about, Kurt and Courtney. It's the most overly documented, damaged couple story in the history of rock and roll. And that's why I say that this one is more important in the annals of time than Sid and Nancy. Sid and Nancy ended with them both dying, and this ended with just Kurt dying and a whole lot of speculation around it, to the point where it's still being talked about today. And another reason why this ranks way higher than Sid and Nancy is basically because of Kurt's status as like the most important rock and roll songwriter to ever exist. And the person that he was in a relationship wasn't just some groupie whispering sweet nothings into his ear. No, his girlfriend, his wife, the mother of his child was also a very highly influential front person in her own band. So all of those elements together is a recipe for complete chaos. And then you throw in all the drugs and all the alcohol and all the partying and all the touring and all the fucking drama, and then you know that it's gonna end in death one way or another. And sure enough, it did. But just one cursory search of YouTube brings up all these examples of videos that you can watch about that toxic ass relationship. So I'm not out here to say stop being in a damaged relationship. Clearly stop being in a damaged relationship if you're in a damaged relationship. This is stop romanticizing and publicizing damaged as an aesthetic, as a cinematic appeal to get clicks on your stuff. If you find yourself watching a couple from a train wreck perspective, maybe like second guess that again and be like, am I perpetuating a cycle of abuse? And another example of the polar opposite of this type of relationship, even though it could very well be, is Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne. Sharon comes across like Ozzy's caretaker, if anything else. They have more of like a PSW elderly person relationship and persona in the public eye, rather than this like damaged thing. And I think she did a pretty good job guiding his career. Okay, well, I'm gonna ride off into the sunset now. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. And until my next upload, watch another upload.